Hey everyone, this is Who Am I? And today I'm joined with Adam Logue, who is a independent security researcher and bug bounty hunter. And thanks for coming, Adam. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
And yeah, I'm really excited to find out. We're going to talk about your background, of course. That's how we start everybody off. We want to talk about how you got into hacking, why you got into hacking, because it's as I think I've said every time now, it's kind of a unique profession. So we'll get into that, and then we're going to talk about some of the specific expertise that you have. So you're a bug bounty hunter, but you also have done car hacking a lot and some other things that I'm really interested in. And I really wanted to have you on to talk about some of those specifics that you are into that is a more of a niche within bug bounty. So I'm excited to talk about that. So yeah, so first thing is just like I said, interested in how you got into hacking. You've been a really successful researcher. We've worked together a bit before. I know that you're really very talented. So, where did this all start for you? How did you get into hacking specifically?
Yeah, so I think ever since I was a little kid, I always, knew I wanted to be a hacker. It all really started when I was around 6 years old, and I was watching the movie Sneakers with my dad. And in like the second scene of the movie, the main character, Robert, or played by Robert Redford, he walks into this bank and he pretends to be this other guy, and he's got like a little earpiece in his ear, and there's a bunch of guys in the van. And they're like guiding him through everything. And he's like, "Yes, I'd like to withdraw all my money." And so they put all the money into a suitcase, and then he takes the suitcase, starts walking out of the bank, stops, turns, walks up the stairs, and then goes into this little wide open office area surrounded by a whole bunch of executives sitting in suits. And he opens the suitcase filled with money, turns it towards him, and goes, "Here's everything wrong with your bank." And I was just like, "Oh my god, that's what I want to do." But of course, you know, that was back in the '90s, and hacking had a very different connotation back then, and so it wasn't exactly something that I knew like, oh, I can just become a penetration tester, and that's exactly sort of the thing they do. And so, I'd always grow up telling my family, "I want to be a hacker when I grow up." And they're like, "We don't want you to go to prison." And so it was around sixth grade where I was doing this like career day thing. And one of the counselors that pulled me aside and was just like trying to like help me along with my career was just like, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And I was like, "I want to do something, with like hacking and computers and stuff." And she's like, "You're not going to believe this, but my daughter actually is going to school for that exact thing." And I was like, "Really?" So she told me about Ferris State University and how they had their information assurance program, is what they called it at the time. And then that eventually, by the time I got to college, turned into information security and intelligence. And I pretty much just kind of followed the whole like graduate from high school, go to college, do that whole thing. But of course, growing up, I didn't necessarily have a whole lot of money. I just had to pay my entire way through college. So I ended up working at a shooting range to pay my way through college, and ended up going to community college first. And actually, I'll be honest, I learned a lot more from community college than I did from the 4 year college that I went to. So Grand Rapids Community College has a great program, and then Ferris State also has a pretty decent program. And so I got bachelor's in information security intelligence, and before that, I got associates in information security. So that was sort of the growing up thing. When I was, I want to say like six, I had my first computer. It was like Windows 3.1, and I didn't really know a lot about stuff back then, computer wise, but my dad, he had a little bit of technical abilities. And my uncle actually used to be an instructor for ITT Tech. So whenever they would get new equipment, all the old equipment would go to the dumpster,
Ah,
and he would save that stuff and then give it to my dad, and
yeah.
would set it up for me. So I was playing with like QBasic, and even before that, when I was a lot younger, I would be like just messing around with Paintbrush, and then my dad
Oh,
taught me
yeah.
to save my stuff to floppy disks and everything. So I grew up really, really enjoying computers and starting to really have that interest, back before I was even really in like elementary school. And so fast forward to after I graduated from high school, my cousin, he actually works in cybersecurity for one of the three-letter alphabet soup agencies.
Mm.
He sort of guided me along the path of like, hey, why don't you look at virtual machines and start learning a lot of Linux stuff? Because prior to that, my only real Linux experience was from my interest in iPhone jailbreaking. And
Oh, yeah.
coincidentally, like that actually gave me experience with like a Linux terminal. Even before I started really getting very familiar with Linux. So I think it was in high school I got my first iPod Touch, and I realized that if you jailbreak it, you can put games on it. And I was like, oh,
Yeah,
like
of course. Yeah, that's a lot of hackers, I think, came out of some form of game hacking or some desire to play games or something like that, right? That's funny.
exactly. And I ended up, not understanding whatever I was doing. I was just kind of like reading blog posts and like watching YouTube videos. I'm like, okay, let's try this. I'm like, I hope it doesn't, do anything bad. And I jailbroke it, and from there I started learning like, oh, I can put a terminal on my iPod Touch, and I pretty much kept up with it along the way and was just researching into like iOS exploits, and that was sort of an area that interested me before it got really difficult to do. And I remember right, I want to say it was like midway through high school when I got my driver's license. My dad's like, "All right, you have to pay for your car insurance and your cell phone now." And I'm like, "But I don't have a job. I'm in high school. I'm doing sports and stuff." And he's just like, "You better find a way." So I had this little like side hustle where I'd run a little business jailbreaking and unlocking iPhones, and then I'd advertise on Craigslist, meet with people at Panera, plug their phone to my laptop, and do all that stuff. So um, you know, right along that time was when I ended up getting into like virtual machines and everything, right? So I had to circle back around there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I downloaded Backtrack Linux, right? It was Backtrack 3, and then shortly after Backtrack 4 was released. So that was around the time that I actually started. And I was just watching YouTube videos from this guy named Got Milk, and
Oh, yeah, of course. I think, yeah. I wonder the percentage of, people working in penetration testing teams that came up with, looking at stuff from Got Milk.
oh
I
yeah,
think it's probably a huge percentage, right?
oh I'm sure, like a lot of the stuff that I was following along with him, was like learning how to crack WEP or WPA2, and I'd set up my own little WRT 54G router, like little blue and black
Yeah,
and
yeah.
white. Yeah. So I set that up, and then I'd have my own like hardware that I'd install like a vulnerable by design Windows XP computer because that's what everyone was using at the time. I'd follow along with exploiting like MSO 8067 and stuff like that. And from there I started to actually learn like, okay, what's happening on the back end. I wanted to be more than just a script kiddie and just be able to like type stuff out and push a button and hey, it works, right?
Yeah, like, why does this work, right?
Exactly. So around the time that I was actually going through college, one of my professors introduced me to a security conference in Grand Rapids called GERCON, and it was only like in the second or third year running. And pretty much I ended up getting a ticket, and I went there. I had, not a lot of idea what I was doing, but I saw they had to capture the flag. And so I was like, okay, let's try to, you know, see what this is all about. And so I just sort of, shoulder surfed, and I saw this guy working on it. I'm like, oh, try this, try that. Like this is back in the good old Metasploit days where like
Yeah, yeah.
everything was just like press button, receive bacon. And so I was helping this guy out, and he, gave up and got bored. And I was just like, oh man, well, let me continue trying. So I got my laptop out, and I actually continued doing that. I placed third, the first time doing that.
Wow.
And so I was like, not bad. And actually, I technically tied for second, but like the other guy submitted the flag like a minute before me. So, and from there, I was sort of like hooked on the whole cybersecurity thing. So
Yeah. Did you say that was in high school or when you were in community college?
community college, yeah. So it's like right
Okay.
after high school, a year or so after.
And what was that community college again?
Grand Rapids Community College. So I live in
Okay.
Grand Rapids, Michigan, and it was a cheap way to go because my grades were terrible. My GPA was terrible. I was a terrible student. Not gonna lie. I got waitlisted going to Ferris, and it took a lot of begging and pleading and convincing the um, you know people to let me into Ferris. I'm like, hey, look, you see all my grades in computer classes are all A's. Like don't look,
Right, right.
you know.
That's
um,
funny though. I mean, it's been a kind of a consistent theme so far with the guests that I've had on this show so far. Has been, yeah, I was a terrible student. I wasn't interested, whatever. But I liked computers, and you know, I wanted to make sure I caught the name of the community college because I like to give props to community colleges, especially in universities that have these kind of programs for cyber or for information security. Because I remember when I was looking, there weren't a lot of options, and even once some options started to come around, it was generally like a master's or something, and there was no real entry level, at least in the area I was in Michigan and Ohio at the time. Well, Southern Michigan, Northern Ohio back then. And so I always like to give credit where these schools exist that have these programs and everything. So that's really cool. And I love how you said you had terrible grades, and so you couldn't get into Ferris. But I like how you went the route of you went to community college, and then I'm sure that helped establish, hey, here's my proof that I can do this. Why you should let me into the university, right? So I love that. That's great that you were able to go that route and go, okay, I didn't focus on whatever subjects in high school. My grades aren't great, but I can go to community college for a couple of years, get an associate's, prove that I can do this, and then get into the university that I want. So that's really cool.
yeah, and I mean, I will say going to college in this day and age doesn't necessarily um, make or break getting into this industry that I found. I don't know, for instance, my fiance, she's a penetration tester, and she went the army route actually. So
Yeah.
after she got out, then she ended up getting a job as a sysadmin at a big company, and then she transferred. And now she's a penetration tester at CDW, and um, you know, zero college skills, but she has all the technical abilities just from the self training and everything like that. So while it does help, it's getting more and more expensive, and I wouldn't necessarily say that all the classes in college I took were all that great for helping me with that. I had a lot of self study. I was watching a lot of YouTube videos, doing a lot of CTFs and everything, and I think that overall really helped. There were some other things in college that did help well round me. For instance, I ended up doing the collegiate cyber defense competition when I was at Ferris, and so
Right.
ironically, um, so that's sort of like the blue team thing where each of the college universities they have this like it was like a vSphere vCloud cluster thing, and you'd each have your own little network segment, right? And they're all vulnerable by design systems, and you have to quickly patch them while the red team's trying to get in, right? And the red team at the time was actually Nate Dreyer, Viet, all the local Grand Rapids guys that you and I used to work with, and that's originally how I met them. So we ended up, I want to say it was like Ryan Griffin, actually. I met him in college, and he and I, we did that, CCDC thing together. We did a couple college classes together. And, he was one of those people that really helped me, or push me for, you know, learning as much stuff as I could and continuing on with like the actual offensive security track. A lot of people I found in college, they go towards like the blue team stuff because that's a lot of more what they teach in college. And
Sure.
so anytime I had like the ability to do a course substitution for any kind of offensive security class, I would do that just because it'd make it easier for me. And several of my professors really pushed me to like do stuff above and beyond just the regular class stuff, and they'd give me extra credit where, maybe I missed an assignment here or there, but then I did a bunch of extra credit and that made up for it. So I'd, still be able to get a good grade at the end of the semester. But even, the above and beyond stuff, um, that really helped. So shortly after I graduated from college, I was still working at the shooting range and didn't really know what I was going to do with my life. Meanwhile, Ryan got his first job, and then another one of my friends, Connor, he got his first big boy job working at the local healthcare organization in Grand Rapids here. Spectrum, it's now called Corwell Health, but it used to be called Spectrum Health. And so he was like, "Hey, they're building out a blue team." And I remember, or sorry, they're building out a red team. And I remember one night we were all like sitting together, and he was like, "Do you guys want to order pizza?" And I was like, "Oh no, I can't afford it." And they're like, "Oh, don't worry, we got this." I was just like, "Wow, they have real big boy jobs and they can afford this. I should probably do something with my degree."
Yeah, for sure.
So
That's cool though. You have like a local, obviously I know Dryer and I know some of the people, Viet and some of the people from Grand Rapids, but I didn't actually realize that you kind of came up together uh and had like a little hacker subculture there in Grand Rapids. It sounds like you had like sounds like you got together locally too in person talking about getting pizza. I mean, that's really cool. I didn't really have that as much, and yeah, I really like the idea of like physical hacker meetups. So I
yeah,
just, yeah, I didn't realize you guys all came up together in that area. That's really cool. So just wanted to mention that.
yeah. I mean, um, just from that, little hangout that we had, obviously like Ryan, Connor, and I, we all went to college together, so like, we'd see each other quite a bit, and just learning that, hey, they have a red team coming up. Connor said he'd put in a good word for me, and he got me the initial interview and everything. Of course, I aced the interview for like the HR stuff and everything, and got to the technical interview. And I remember they not wheeled me in. I was sitting in like a rolly chair, so I felt like they wheeled me in. They sat me down in front of a laptop, and there was no internet connection. And they said, like, here's Kali Linux. Here is DVWA, or sorry, yeah, DVWA, damn vulnerable web app. And they're like, this is vulnerable to SQL injection. Go ahead and exploit it. And oh, let me give a quick background here. All my penetration testing stuff up to this point was all like network penetration testing experience,
Uh,
and the job that they wanted me for was a web application testing stuff, or web application testing job. So I ended up, I want to say the night before, I'm downloading a vulnerable application called Matilda, and I started practicing with that, walking myself through it, trying to like, you know, at least get some idea of what I was doing. I had no idea really. I was just sort of following along with the footsteps, script kidding, everything like that. And so during the interview, they asked me like, can you exploit this with SQL injection? And I was like, can I Google the, actual flags for SQL map and stuff? And they're like, no, you have to figure it out. And I managed to like work through it with like the wizard and like, next, finish pretty
yeah,
much
yeah.
to like get it exploited. And I was able to actually do that. And they said, all right, this is vulnerable to cross-site scripting. And so I, did the real easy script alert tag, thing to pop an alert box. And they're like, okay, cool. And they started asking me questions that were like, talk to me about cross-site request forgery. And, like at the time I could not answer that question. And my coworker Ty, he always teased me about that. He actually works with me on the Synac Red team, and so we still stay in touch quite a bit. But he was sort of like that guy who helped mentor me along the way. And after, well, I left the interview feeling like I completely bombed it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, these guys are way like light years ahead of me, and like um, I got a call back and got the job, and I was like, wow, you guys actually decided to hire me. And they're like, yeah, you were the only one who actually could technically go through everything and, um,
Mm.
hacks. And they're like, we can teach you all the rest of the stuff. So I spent like 2 weeks on WebGoat after that for the first 2 weeks of my job. And I thought, okay, they're just going to ease me into this. And then 2 weeks later, they're like, we have a penetration test for you. if you have any questions, ask your coworkers. And I'm like, okay. So I got thrown in the deep end and ended up being a web app pen tester for a while ever since. So um, that worked out for about a year and a half. And during that time, Spectrum Health Red Team, which was the team I was on, was asked to also participate in the CCDC thing from the red team perspective. So I got to not only do it from the blue team perspective, but also the red team perspective. So at that point, that was when I first started really getting to work with Nate Dreyer and Viet and all the other guys who were doing that. And they were like, "Hey, if you want a job at SecureWorks, go ahead and apply. We'll definitely refer you." And so I was like, "Cool."
Nice.
So I ended up leaving Spectrum Health, and then I got a job at SecureWorks, my first remote job, and I was actually there for a little over 6 years. I recently, unfortunately, got laid off, but that actually granted me the ability to actually go full time into bug bounty hunting and 1099 pen testing. So that's sort of where I'm at today.
Yeah, that's a pretty good run at SecureWorks. It's a pretty good run at any pen test shop or red team or anything like that. A lot of people have to move around within the industry, right? Um, that's pretty cool and kind of funny that that Dryer and Viet kind of stole you away from the other job. They're like, "Hey, you're pretty good at this. Why don't you come put in an application?" Yeah, but I did want to also point out again, this is like a consistent theme here. There's been at least a couple people already who part of their journey initially and how they maybe came to red team versus going blue side, how they kind of realized how they could skill up in this. It happened through conferences, right? And that's something that I want to point out too, because I think years ago, um, everybody was sending everybody to conferences, and I mean companies, you know, companies, pen test shops, companies that have internal red teams. They were very encouraging about getting people out to conferences and helping people do that. And I've seen that kind of drop off or drop off pretty significantly actually. And it's just like they don't want to spend the budget. But there's so many stories like this where you know, I've heard, like I said, just multiple now on a few interviews where somebody who was coming up that had an interest met some people at a conference and it accelerated their learning, accelerated their career. Maybe you got a job out of it. I think Tony Gore actually, he met Sands and then later got hired to SecureWorks through that. So, just want to point out how I think those conferences are so important for the people coming up. And I would really like to see us get back to as a broader industry, um, taking that seriously and getting people out to conferences because too often I hear this attitude that like, oh, they're just going there to party or whatever, and then I'm like, all my hacker friends came up going to conferences, right? Like they wouldn't be here for you right now if it wasn't for the conferences. So that just kills me. So I'm really glad to hear that again. That's really cool.
Oh yeah,
And yeah,
100% agree.
I mean, yeah, it's the conferences are a big deal. So I'd like to see companies reprioritize getting their people out to conferences and realize how that is it's like a farm system, right? For people that are looking to get into the industry. It's like the best place to do it. So
Yeah, I would
just
say that
why.
SANS training you mentioned, like I was actually lucky enough that Spectrum Health paid for me to go to SANS a couple times. And, it is some of the more expensive training out there, but
Yeah.
that pretty much took me from this level to this level. And, I ended up taking SEC 660 and SEC 760 with Steve Sims. And, again, I went from being able to, you know, just do regular network attacks and things like that to okay, Now we're actually running buffer overflows, and now we're looking at heap vulnerabilities, and like let's look at use after freeze and hardware driver vulnerabilities and stuff like that. And that kind of training, once you get to sort of those niche areas, it's just second to none. So I 100% support that.
Yeah, yeah, that's where you get exposure to the stuff and find an interest, and that takes you to the next level, right? Like I totally agree on the sands stuff. It is very expensive. It's prohibitively costly for an individual. Um, I don't know if there's grants or funds available for like people in college or something. I hope so, because yeah, it's the kind of thing you can only really do if a company pays for it, right? Which is, people say gatekeeping and stuff, but it is very high quality content. The courses that I've taken have been absolutely awesome and have consistently introduced me to new stuff. And one of my favorite ones was I took the cloud attack course right when it came out, and I thought, maybe I'll learn a few things, here. But I came away from it and I was like, I have to rewrite my whole cloud methodology. I mean, I took so much away from it, and so yeah, it's that exposure. Same thing as like going to conferences, which is a little more affordable for individuals, maybe. Although my DEF CON ticket this year was not cheap. I think it was 480 pre-register. I'm like, man, that's steep for young hackers coming up.
It's only
But
getting expensive.
yeah, well, it's so popular now. I mean, last year the lines were crazy long to get into stuff. I actually, I wanted to get into the AI village. It was the first year, maybe the second year. It felt like the first year that they had it, and I really wanted in there bad. And they had this CTF that was set up through like Google and the White House sponsorship and all this stuff, and I really wanted to get in there bad. And it was like a 4-hour line. It was like wrapped through the whole facility, and I was like, man, I can't stand here all day. There's all this other stuff going on, a lot of people. So I'll admit now that I actually broke in through the side door on day two. So I got in, it was funny because I got into the side door, and then I like went and sat down at a computer real quick, because they had all these computers set up for the CTF. And I ran over there and sat down at a computer before anybody notices me, right? And then I realized like you had to get a login, that you were supposed to go through this whole process that, comes through the front door. Like by the time you get in, you're all set. And so then I was like, oh man, what do I do though? I really want to do this. So I was like, okay, we got a social engineer. I got to social engineer my way out of this too. So then I went around and I found the like paperwork that you were supposed to have, and I filled it out like mostly, and then I walked like backwards into the line, like up to the front, and I was like, hey, I think I missed this part when I was in line. I missed a signature right here. Like I don't know how this happened. Could you sign? And I got all my stuff filled out, and I'm sure somebody involved in that little chain knew what was up, but they were kind enough to let me go. And so I like went backwards through the whole line, got my stuff done, and then ran back in, and I did the CTF for a while. But yeah, but it's so popular now. So DEF CON's super, it's not super expensive. It's an expensive trip, but I still encourage anybody who can go to DEF CON to absolutely go like as soon as possible.
Yeah,
Um,
smaller conferences too. Like
oh yeah,
overwhelming. I'll use GurCon as a great example. It is starting to become a little bit bigger, just because it's filling in from when DerbyCon ended up shutting down, and
right.
a lot more people for that. But a great example for GurCon is you can get a free ticket just from doing these crypto challenges, and I'm one of the people who actually makes the crypto challenges for that for a free ticket. So there's like
Cool.
a free VIP ticket if you solve one of the hard ones, and then for like some of the easier ones, you get a like regular general admission ticket. But it's a great way to actually, especially if you're like a college student or someone who's very technically oriented, you can try to actually work hard to get a ticket without actually paying the full price for it.
That is great. I love that. Yeah, I wonder how many conferences do that. That's really cool because it's so hacker too. Because I know when I was young, there sometimes in my very early hacking career, I was hacking just because I was broke and needed access to services or information, and I could work hard and learn and hack my way there, but I didn't have any money. So I love that because being able to hack or solve, some hacking challenge, crypto challenge to get yourself a ticket, that's like the most hacker thing ever. Um, I don't have money, but I can hack. I love that. So that's really cool. Yeah, I hope more conferences have something like that. And I totally agree on the smaller conferences. One of my favorite uh conferences that I've attended over the years was CypherCon, especially when it was like I'm super happy that it's getting bigger.
Yeah,
Okay, I'm happy for them that they work hard at it and it's really cool, and I'm happy that it's getting bigger. But one of my fondest conference experiences is when it was like super tiny and I like knew everybody and everybody kind of hung out together because the conference was really small,
mhm,
and so that we like went to places in these big groups, and it was just a lot of fun. And yeah, it wasn't overwhelming at all, which DEF CON certainly can be.
sure.
And some of the other larger conferences, I'm sure. But um, yeah, the smaller conferences, you can definitely, it's not as overwhelming, and you can probably more easily make some personal connections or um, stuff like that. So yeah, I
Yeah.
totally agree.
CypherCon is the only conference that has the ISP hacking village, and I like to use that as an example. The first year I went to CypherCon, I walked over and I saw they had the ISP hacking village, and I'm like, huh. I've never done any kind of DOCSIS penetration testing, and it's illegal to hack cable modems and steal internet and stuff like that. So there's not really a great safe place to be able to do that. And so the first year I did it, actually won the CTF at the ISP hacking village, and that completely changed, my whole technical abilities from having just a general idea of stuff to here's a completely separate thing that most people don't know about. Here's how you actually conduct penetration tests against ISPs, and that opened up a lot of extra ability for 1099 work in the future.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, you're definitely somebody, and one of the things I wanted to get to is talking about some of these areas that you're skilled in that is less common among penetration testers, hackers, red teamers, and some of that is, I mean, I didn't even know about the ISP hacking, but you also do car hacking, and I know you do like some physical device security testing, but that's a good point. That so we're talking about these conferences and going to these, you get this new exposure, and I think it's a really good thing to point out that you know I I, I feel like it can be difficult for people to get their first like pen test job, right? That first one is like tough to get, right? And going to conferences is a good way, but for a lot of people, it's just difficult to get that first pen test gig where that's what you're doing, right? Offensive security strictly. And I think that so then once people get that first one, and then there's a bunch of stuff to learn when you get into it. How do they do it here? Um, the great thing about hacking is that it's like different all the time, but you're going to get into this place where they want it done a certain way. You have certain clients and all this stuff, and you can like get into a rhythm and you learn what you need to learn, and then you start to be successful, and it's like, cool, this is great. Uh, but I always encourage people to look for those other areas where, like, okay, you've always been doing web app, like get involved in mobile testing or NetPen, or jump on a red team and learn if you can, if you have access to that. Or if you've always done NetPen, try hardware hacking or something. Like, just try some of this other stuff out, because I think that even if you don't like it, like I was not a huge fan of mobile hacking. I did some testing, but I was really not really feeling this. But like, just
Not one of
even
my
when that happens, yeah. But even when it happens, like, you've expanded, not just expanded your skill set, but I feel like when you do that and you add like another like subdomain or subtopic within hacking, I feel like it just broadens, like generalizes you under hacking, and it's easier to like learn the next thing, or work on something you don't have experience with after that, like after you start to just kind of branch out. So yeah, I always encourage people to try different stuff. Has that been like your experience, that when you try something you don't know in hacking, like you grow at your hack, you grow as a hacker, right?
Yeah, honestly, the best way to learn is just to like hands on, just do it, right? So I'll give a great example is the car hacking village, right? Um, I saw them first appear at GrrCon in 2016, and GrrCon being in Grand Rapids is pretty close to Detroit, so I had a lot of the automotive hacker talent, from Detroit coming over to our local conference to be able to sort of open up the concept of it. And I was like, well, I like cars, I like hacking. Let's see what I can do with both of these things. So I sat down at the table, and I was like the only one there, and I was talking to the guy running it at the time, Robert. And he was like, "Hey, are you interested in doing this?" I'm like, "I have zero idea what I'm doing. I would like to learn, and if you can just give me a quick crash course, I can probably just Google everything and try to, get the basics down." So he went over like a couple of things with me. He had this little device that was like a little ECU, and it was like programmed to just do a couple little things, not a whole lot, because it was just like a little flashing light on it. But the little ECU unit, it ran a CAN bus, and I had to learn. Okay, not everything is just going to be like a simple network that uses TCP/IP, stuff like that. We have a whole new protocol here, but it's still a network, it's still a bus, and um, learning the actual like concept of the CAN bus sort of brought me into the wider view of connected cars and vehicles. And so the first year they actually they didn't really have a prize. They just sort of gave me that little device to play with. They're like, "Here,
Oh,
you're
cool.
sat here the whole time. You win this." I'm like, "Cool." But then the following year, sorry, the following year they had the first actual CTF for the um, actual car hacking village, and so I actually started that, and Ryan Griffin joined me, in on that, and we kind of like got up to speed. And back then, car hacking wasn't a huge thing like you see in the internet now, and you hear about like, oh, these people are stealing these cars using these modern techniques, and it's
Right.
the idea of like modern hot wiring, right? And so Ryan and I were competing, and we came up with the team name Can Boss, and that was sort of our like car hacking team name ever since. I pretty much was just like, all right, can boss works
Yeah,
out.
yeah.
Um, but we ended up like winning the CTF that year, and then for the next, I think, 5 or 6 years in a row, and you know, at GrrCon we were sort of undefeated. Now, when I went to DEF CON, I was participating against actual like world class car hackers. We didn't do nearly as well. I think the first year we did the car hacking village at DEF CON, we got seventh place, and then we got um, I think we got fifth place last year, and we'll see what happens this year. But for a group of people that come together who do this as a hobby versus we're competing with people who do this professionally for a living, it's not too bad.
Yeah, I was gonna say fifth place doesn't sound too bad actually for DEF CON being as big of a conference as it is, and as competitive as it is, in all ways. I mean, it's people want to show off there, people want to win a black badge, and so super competitive. But that, yeah, I mean, that sounds pretty good. And yeah, I wanted to ask you about the car hacking more because I have no experience with it. It's one of the few things that I haven't really touched within hacking, and it does interest me. Like when you're at GurCon, let's say, you mentioned like the one device, but I guess what sort of exploits are we talking about? What are the impacts of some of these exploits on these cars?
Yeah, so it's not going to necessarily be sort of the same concept as like, oh, drop into a shell and you start pivoting throughout the network. A lot of times you're dealing with a lot of lower level systems. These ECUs are a lot simpler, and instead of having a whole bunch of interfaces, they might only have a couple. And these days cars are getting smarter, and we're starting to see more and more different systems interconnected. So you have things like your simple CAN bus that pretty much connects the ECUs between each other. You've now got an Ethernet bus that runs through cars. They have like your head unit, right? That has your media center and everything like that on it. You change the radio and stuff.
Yeah.
That's going to have Bluetooth. It's going to have Wi-Fi. A lot of these cars
Right.
5G now. You look at things like OnStar or Sirius XM, like even those components now not only have internet connectivity, but they also have actual web APIs that connect with them. And you may have no idea that your car is even connected to the internet. And, just by having these devices in your car, it's making requests outbound. So I always like to use the example of the Jeep hack from 2016. That was Chris Valasek and Charlie Miller that did that, and pretty much they found that the OnStar system within that Jeep, it used 3G at the time, and 3G, of course, is unencrypted by nature. But because Sprint, firewalls off everything, they couldn't necessarily access the internal network of there. But they found that a lot of farmers would use these devices called femtocells, and with a femtocell, it pretty much acts like an extra cellular tower. You connect it to the internet, and then that would be in like your house. And so if you're on a farm, you're nowhere near any cell towers, you'd be able to get cell phone signal on your farm.
Oh, interesting.
So they found this femtocell that had a back door in it, and they were able to proxy all their traffic through the femtocell to get into the Sprint network behind the firewall. And now they could actually port scan all these devices and see, like, okay, what internet connectivity are these things, able to, well, what services can we actually exploit on this? And they were able to find a way to compromise one of the ECUs and pivot to other ECUs in the car, and then they could start sending commands to the vehicle, and they'd be able to pretty much steer it or accelerate, apply the brakes, because these vehicles now are no longer just fully mechanical. You've got drive-by-wire vehicles, and even aircraft are now becoming fly-by-wire vehicles.
Wow. That's fascinating. I guess I hadn't considered all the tech that's being pushed into cars now. Um, yeah, that's pretty wild. I wonder, because we're talking about, I think, mostly like combustion engine cars for the most part that have these other services added, like you talk about OnStar and stuff like that. But I do wonder with the push for more EV cars, you know, I feel like almost naturally the car hacking is going to expand, or it's going to be more prevalent. I would suspect.
Oh, for sure. I mean, my newest car right now is a 2005, so I'm actually pretty confident that it's not vulnerable to a lot of remote attack vectors, and it's a manual, which also like reduces the overall attack surface of it. But a lot of these vehicles that have, they're all drive-by-wire, they're all automatic transmissions. Like, um, there's a bigger and bigger attack surface these days that you have on vehicles with all these interconnected systems. And I use the example, people often update their computers and they update their phones. How often do you update your car, right? So
Yeah, that's a good point.
some of these head units, in these cars, like, I'll give an example. There's a 2017 car that I was working on, and the head unit was running Android from 2012. I think it was like Android Lollipop, which has a whole bunch of known vulnerabilities in it. And um, again, if you figure like this head unit is connected to the internet and exposing services, if someone's able to find a remote attack vector into there to compromise just the head unit's also connected to the other parts of the car over the CAN bus, and someone could compromise that, get their little foothold and then start sending false data, spoofing data to the ECU or the other components of the car and make it do things it shouldn't. Like when you're sort of threat modeling a car, you have to sort of figure out, okay, what are more of the critical systems, like the safety critical systems, like the airbags, and then you have like the um, you know vehicle critical systems, like the actual engine, transmission. And then of course you have your not so critical systems like the seat warmers and like the air conditioning and stuff like that. But you can still sometimes figure out, okay, I figured out exactly which message to transmit across the CAN bus to actually make the seat move forward. And if you are able to, do something like turn on the windshield wipers or, like move the seat forward and they try to move it back and it won't move back and they keep moving forward, that could still get someone into a car accident,
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I would imagine most people would start to freak out, probably end up in an accident just because you're like panicking in this moment where you're already driving and your seat just keeps going forward, right?
yeah.
Yeah. That would not be great.
I mean, a lot of the stuff is sometimes more difficult to get into because there's not as much material out there as there is with like network penetration testing or web
Yeah.
application testing. But a great example is Robert. Actually, he runs, or yeah, there's a company called Canvas Hack that he actually set up this whole like website with this whole application called Cloud Car, and it was actually used in the DEF CON and the GERCON car hacking CTFs a couple years ago. And pretty much with this like website, it's like let me see if I can, if you want to pull that up real quick, I can show you. Um, it's actually I think it's free right now. I think he's originally trying to make some money off of it, but right now, as far as I know, it's an um, open system. And instead of having to buy all the hardware to actually like connect to your car and actually be able to interface with the CAN bus, you can literally use this website and interface with the CAN bus. They pretty much spin up like these little cloud Raspberry Pis that are connected to these virtual ECUs. Um,
Yeah.
and then from there, you can pretty much, you know, play with this virtual car that goes around the track. And it's great for learning things like how to blow the airbags in a car, or how to like make the car go faster or slower just by controlling it through the CAN bus. And
Interesting. And
um,
what was that site? Do you know?
I posted in the private chat here. I don't know if you can see it.
Okay. I'll grab that. Thank you. Yeah, I'll pull that up real quick. And I can put this in the video description too, because that is really cool. That's a very interesting way for people to get some exposure to this. So pull this up. Uh, I don't think. There we go. All right. Yeah. So this is it, right?
Yeah.
Cloudcar.canbushack.com.
Mhm.
Can't see the URL here on my shared screen, but I'll post it in the description for this episode. So for people who want to go and check this out, I will post this link either in the comments or description or both, so you can go and check this out. But that is really cool. I would have had no idea um, how to get started in this, and now people can go here and check it out. That's awesome.
Yeah, and a lot of the car hacking trainings I've done, one sort of revolved around this entire cloud car system. Another one that was actually in person before COVID happened, like was really cool. I got to go to Detroit with Ryan, and go to Robert's actual CAN bus hack shop, and pretty much like, he had things like a semi truck, a Tesla, motorcycles, like
Oh man,
hack on. And so he
that
like,
is really cool.
yeah, he ran the class, and then the first couple of days you're learning a lot of the stuff, and then the next couple of days he's like, "All right, there's a whole bunch of stuff here to play with, like, split into groups, and then, if you guys are interested in, doing a specific thing, we can, either work with smaller groups, or we can, maybe work with bigger groups." So I got to learn, a different flavor of can called J1939 that, semi trucks, marine vehicles, farm equipment, all those things use, and sort of get into the world of um, like tractor hacking and semi truck hacking. And then he ended up demoing a really cool thing with a Jeep. It was an immobilizer bypass. And so we learned all the concepts of, you know, dumping the firmware off of an immobilizer, going through finding the actual algorithm that tells it, like, hey, um, I have the key present. Because, like, if you don't have the key, sometimes your key fob dies.
Right.
A lot of vehicles still have like a little sleeve you can put it in, or like you RFID read it by touching the like key to the, like, push the start button or whatever. And so he like helped code it out in Python to show us, here's how you pretty much can like steal a Jeep, or sorry, borrow a Jeep. So we learned how to, work with borrow.py. And, like, um, again, for some of these types of CVEs, they get reported to the vendor, but how do you know, patch a vehicle that, thousands of people have, with a critical system like that? It's not always super easy, because sometimes it's an actual hardware exploit, and so you'd have to completely replace the hardware unit in there. So they'd have to take it into the dealership and then pay money, and then have the dealership order in a new ECU that's been patched by the vendor, and then install that. And before that all happens, like, it gets really expensive. And if unless there's like some kind of recall for the car, people aren't going to necessarily go ahead and do that. So
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, I wonder, have there been recalls for I would be interested if there's been recalls over, vulnerable systems like that.
Yeah, like the Jeep hack in 2016, that was a great example. They had a giant recall of a whole bunch of now it's Stellantis, but at the time it was Fiat Chrysler of America, or FCA. They had a whole recall on a whole bunch of Dodges, Jeeps, and Fiats and Chryslers. And they were like, hey, like, you need to do a software update, and they'd be able to do it via like the USB into the vehicle. But
Interesting.
yeah, the again, like, you've got modern companies like Tesla who literally just do the updates over the internet to the cars. And um, sometimes it can be inconvenient. Like, you're trying to get somewhere and you have to wait for your car to update, and you're like, I have to go. But, like, your car is updating. A lot of times they'll ask you, like, would you like to update at 2 a.m.? Like, or sometimes
Right.
you're not going to be um, you know, awake and needing your vehicle at that time. But I can see that as also being an issue where, like, if there's an emergency and in the middle of the night you have to get up and go somewhere,
And your car's updating.
yeah,
Oh,
it's always good to either have a second vehicle, or
yeah.
buy an older car. I mean, like, there's something to be said about like, I've got a 1980 MGB as one of my vehicles, right? It's completely mechanical. There's no actually, it's not completely mechanical. It's had an engine swap. But just MGs in general, right? Like, these little British sports cars, they're carbureted. There's no CAN bus or anything. When something breaks on it, you can troubleshoot it by air, spark, or battery. Um, stuff like that. Versus, like, let's say a giant EMP hits, and, like, all these vehicles that are interconnected go down. Like, you could pretty much put a battery in one of these carbureted vehicles, and it'll start up and drive away. So um, said about older cars having a lower attack surface.
Yeah, yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think because I mean, too, as that market expands, as the EV market expands, like any market, as it expands, I feel like the more players you have involved, you're going to get varying levels of quality of uh, security, right? So as I think we see more companies transition to making EVs, or new companies come up that are making even just parts for EVs and everything, you're going to have like different varying levels of quality involved, and I could see future recalls for things being vulnerable to exploitation. So, wow, that's really interesting. I mean, informed me a lot. I had almost no knowledge on this topic, and now I also know where I can go and start learning
Oh yeah.
about hacking cars. That's very cool. I'm like super interested in it now.
I've actually
And
expanded that also, not just vehicles, but like aviation as well. So like,
ah,
I got lucky where there's a couple projects I got to work on. One was um, a component for a fighter jet. One was a attack helicopter, and it was really cool from just a perspective of, like I'm used to working on like things for regular vehicles that we drive, but then when you get into the whole avionics side of things, like you got actual redundancies between systems and backups of backups. And it really actually made me feel a lot safer flying in an aircraft, realizing that these things are incredibly difficult to hack with all the backups and redundancies. And the only things that we were able to really do is just, make it mess up the instruments and make it harder for the pilots to land. But besides that, the um you can't really take these aircraft out of the air easily through a cyber attack. Like if one system goes down, there's always another system that can, pick up the slack, or, there's redundancies between them. So there's very robust systems in avionics.
interesting. Yeah, that's something else that I didn't know about, and I certainly started to wonder about when I hadn't flown. I mean, like probably a lot of people because of COVID and everything, I hadn't flown for a little while, and the last time I flew, I mean, they have stuffed so much tech into the planes now. I mean, you have Wi-Fi. You have all these monitors and systems throughout the plane. Um, and I'm sitting there looking at it going, expanded attack surface, but so I was interested, but that's cool that's interesting to hear that they have such level of like redundancy and failure backups built in and everything. I mean, makes sense, right? But it's often, even when the threat model is there, sometimes you don't always see the investment in security that you'd like to see. So it's cool that they've actually made that investment, which makes sense. I mean, it's the absolutely most crucial part of, if you're operating it as a business, it's the most crucial part of your airline business. You can't have a plane fall out of the sky. And even Boeing recently, I hate to knock on them, but just from having small issues that have come up. It's a PR nightmare, right? So if you have a plane fall out of the sky, that's like the worst thing that could possibly happen for your business. And then, of course, military avionics, you know, the, it, you can't jeopardize the mission or the pilot or the however many tens of millions of dollars you spend on the aircraft, right? It's so I guess there's a added sense of, we have to have the security and the redundancy, um, because the costs are so high, right? So good to know that you struggled with attacking avionics, because I like flying. I don't want,
Me too.
I want my plane being messed with. So that's cool. Um, awesome. So I guess one of the other things that I wanted to talk to you about was, you mentioned that there's been a bunch of layoffs, obviously in the industry over the last few years for a variety of reasons, and you were caught up in this at SecureWorks, and you said that you transitioned to doing bug bounty and 1099 work. And I wanted to ask you about that. And I guess since we're on the topic of vehicle hacking, uh, to tie into that, are you aware of any bug bounty programs for vehicles? Are there like vehicle bug bounty programs out there?
Oh yeah, there's a bunch. Tesla, BMW, GM, Toyota, like a lot of these all have bug bounty programs, and some of them even have it for their car specifically. Like for Tesla, if you register your car as a bug bounty vehicle and you mess it up, they will factory reset it over the air for you. And
Whoa, no way.
yeah, they have a whole bunch of stuff to help people identify these bugs. And so you see at things like Pwn to Own, they're looking at actual Tesla like attack chains where they compromise it via like the Wi-Fi stack or Bluetooth or something like that, compromise the head unit, and they're able to do other stuff to the whole vehicle like remotely. So um, when they disclose these things at these big events like that, they get paid out a whole bunch of money and they get the fame, and then Tesla gets to patch that, and then the cars are collectively safer. Um, Even
Yeah.
um, other like farm equipment manufacturers, they have bug bounty programs as well. There's one of those that I've been able to get some hardware that I'm actually working on bug bounty hunting on. It's a very robust system. It's very secure, and I'm very impressed with it. So like these companies are doing their due diligence. I think there was at one point in time a sort of a gap between the companies implementing cybersecurity into vehicles, and they've definitely caught up to that, and now they're starting to surpass it. They're adding things like gateways between systems, so now it's harder to interface with other systems on a vehicle. Like you can't just plug into the OBD2 port and then expect to be able to like see all the traffic now. You might have some stuff firewalled off that you can only see like specific things unless you can authenticate through there, and then you can see the other stuff. And a lot of these
Mm.
systems have really like um, really stepped the game up for the automotive industry.
Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. That they're sort of like segmenting off these different systems within the car. Man, that's got to be a pain to to have to do that because of the risk of hacking. Like what to build all that redundancy and all those firewalls, controls, and everything within that system uh, sounds very complex.
Yeah, I
Sounds
mean,
very challenging.
bug bounty in general, it's not typically as common to see like um, embedded systems and stuff in bounty programs. A lot of that time, or a lot of that's going to be more so like web applications, network segments and stuff like that, externally available assets. And a lot of times that's just something that a company is doing to augment their whole security posture. So they might have their internal teams that are also working on testing and securing stuff, but a lot of times there's stuff that gets overlooked by, a specific team. And sometimes, more sets of eyes, like through bug bounty hunting, these bug bounty hunters are able to spot stuff and identify these flaws that are sometimes very difficult to find. It helps, secure, everything for the company as a whole, because honestly, it costs a lot less to pay out a bug bounty hunter than it does to handle the whole PR nightmare of being in the news and dealing with all the fallout of a data breach or ransomware and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that one of the reasons that or one of the reasons to use bug bounty is you have to recognize that you can have like an internal red team, um, but there's most internal red teams, as far as my experience, do not get to openly hunt against their organization. Um, Everything has to be approved through leadership for testing, and it gets scoped down to like a specific service or a microservice or this web app over here or whatever, right? And just there's this whole idea of like operating the business,
Sure.
right? And as the red team, you're supposed to like fit into this these operations and make sure all this stuff is like business focused. And what ends up happening is that, like I said, you get these like tight scopes, and you don't get to freely hunt, and you have a lot of stuff that you have to do. Like you have to produce, documentation. You have to produce presentations for leadership. You have to, oh, this thing happened. We need to randomize you now, and you need to help out with this other team or whatever. And that is so vastly different from how someone can operate on bug bounty, right? It's just not even remotely the same. You can't expect the same results. And I think it's important for organizations to recognize that as a reason to use bug bounty. Like you're not gonna, well, we're not gonna do that with our red team. Our red team's gonna be like, no, just just recognize the difference between what your red team is going to deliver internally just by the nature of being part of the organization, and what external researchers can deliver. And a lot of the freedom that external researchers get, I feel, directly translates into like more complex findings and attack chains, and definitely things that your internal red team will look at and be like, how did they think to look at that, right? Because they don't have the time to, again, to think in a way, to be in a mindset of open freely attacking an organization with no kind of restrictions, right? So I think that allows a lot more creativity and results in finding bugs that you won't find when you're internal. I've definitely seen that in my experience, both running bug bounty programs and being on an internal red team, and then I've done some actual bug bounty myself for other orgs in the past. But seeing it, I think, from the other side, being like a triager on a bug bounty team and just seeing all the submissions that come in, gave me a lot of perspective on it. I was always really impressed by what the top 5 or 10 researchers in a program were bringing.
Oh, sure.
It was always really interesting stuff, very creative.
Yeah, you get to sort of see some of their secret sauce when you work on the triaging side of the bug bounty program.
Yeah, like I said, some of those researchers are amazingly creative, and like I said, I've looked at reports and I'm like, why did they even think to do this part? Like, it's really fun to see and try to figure out like how are they, what mind, like kind of what headspace are they in to get this attack chain? Right?
Sure.
It's again not the same as a corporate headspace.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that. And um, yeah, I mean, you said you do some Synac red team. I know Tony was on here. We talked about Synac a little bit. What kind of do you do? What other bug bounty platforms do you use as doing bug bounty?
So primarily, it's going to be Synac and HackerOne. Those are the two platforms I've done a lot of work with. I do have a bug crowd account, but I haven't necessarily done a lot of hunting on bug crowd programs just because, like, I mean, I've submitted some things, I've gotten duped a lot, and so it really depends on which program has, sort of the companies that have the attack surface I'm going after. So, for instance, if I find a novel new technique on how to compromise something that has a specific technology, I'll have to like go on Shodan or enumerate, you know, which programs have what back end systems and technologies in place, and then sort of target those specific organizations that have these bug bounty programs that actually pay out for this stuff, and say, okay, here's something that I'm looking at. Like, let's say I'm looking at, Microsoft IIS, like, for instance, view state deserialization is a great example. That's one of those things where I would go across the entire internet, comb the internet with like Tony Gore and Jared McLaren, and we would like try to find all these specific um, vulnerable systems that have bug bounty programs that pay out. And a great example of that, we ended up finding 2 Microsoft systems that were actually vulnerable to that, and we were able to report it, and then end up splitting the bounty between all three of us. So it's awesome to work with people who are also very technical because everyone has their own little areas of expertise, and you can sort of split up the workloads, and it really helps, make it a lot more fun when you collaborate.
Yeah, I agree. And I noticed that HackerOne lets hackers collaborate often on reports and on programs.
Synapse
And Synac does that too. Yeah, that's cool. I really like that. Um,
actually, I think
most of them
too. I think all of them are now getting into that whole collaboration mindset.
got it. Okay. Yeah. Back when I was doing more bug bounty, and I was primarily on HackerOne, I don't know if they had that. Um, I think they had teams, but of some kind, but because I remember you could get invited to like a team or something. This is probably, oh god, 2016, 2017. So it was a lot different. But I never really collaborated that much. I did mostly solo work, but um I really liked the collaborations, and I did see, working on the other side, I would see some people who would sync up together on a regular basis, and I would get a report where they work together, and I'm like, "Oh no." It's
It's going to be impressive.
yeah, it's gonna be a complex one. It's gonna be a high impact attack chain, right? And so, and I would see it was like a next level quality to those submissions when those two hackers worked together versus when I would get their solo reports, which were always very good, right? But seeing those ones they collaborated on, like I said, it was always like, oh, this is gonna be a dinger. This is gonna hurt.
I
So
mean,
that's really cool.
from my
Uh
perspective, it's absolutely fantastic when you are, testing something and you just hit this wall. Like for instance, a real common
yeah.
thing these days is on bug bounty programs, you're now not just testing the app, but you're also fighting the WAF as well. So a web application firewall is constantly blocking all your payloads, and you're like, I can't get this. You're like, I'm like 98% there, but I can't quite find the payload that'll get through. And so Synac has its own Slack channel that you can pretty much ask people for help, and then split the bounties between them. And sometimes some people have these novel WAF bypasses that haven't been broadly advertised over the internet and then get patched. So you can use some of those to like sneak one by. And um, when you pay out the other hackers, they're more incentivized to work with you again in the future as well. So
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. So you said that when you are kind of selecting a program, you're really kind of looking across the internet for um these vulnerabilities, see who's vulnerable, go see if they have a program is one approach, right? I would imagine another approach is just looking for companies that have the technology that you're familiar with or interested in hacking, and who has that in scope, right? Um, but a
sometimes,
lot of these,
like going after stuff that interests me, right? Like,
yeah,
the program that I'm like, oh, I like this company. I wonder if they actually are secure. Like start poking at,
ah,
looking at the scope. A lot of companies that have star dot their domain.com versus only this one specific website is in scope. Like the bigger the scope, the larger the attack surface, and usually the more stuff I can find.
yeah, and I was going to ask you about that because some of these maybe larger companies uh, have a pretty large scope at this point. I think that a lot of big companies have realized the ROI, the return on investment that they get for bug bounty, because even when they're paying out a large bounty, you think about what it costs to have a really high end, senior or principal engineer, and it's very expensive to employ people, and so um, there's a very high return on investment for companies to utilize bug bounty. So they want to broaden the scope as much as possible, which is funny to me nowadays, because in the past, certainly, the scopes were smaller, I think, and people were scared a little bit more of letting these hackers, touch our stuff or whatever. But now I think that it's been realized the return on investment. And so these large organizations are like trying to expand the scope as much as they can. And you can have some huge scopes on some of these larger orgs. So when you encounter that and you find an organization, maybe you're interested in hacking, maybe some of their tech stack involves stuff you're familiar with, how do you begin to narrow the scope for yourself for areas to focus on?
Yeah, so a lot of automation can definitely help reduce the overall like noise from the scope and everything. And also using a lot of online resources, some are paid, some are free. Things like whatcms.org or like security trails that can sometimes uncover the technologies behind a lot of these IP addresses or domain names that you find. And you'll even be able to find like historic DNS records that you can then cross-reference to see like these still point to the actual like domain name still. So if you get like a bunch of IP addresses, you can use that to sometimes enumerate some of these subdomains that you wouldn't necessarily know about otherwise. And subdomain brute forcing and other vhost enumeration tools can get you so far sometimes, but there's some really long and sometimes complex like multi-level subdomains that you might be able to find through some of these techniques, and then sort of like um, run a scan for specific technologies on these things, and then be able to narrow in on specific novel techniques. Other times it's just a matter of you're working on an authenticated application, and you just kind of have to click on everything and figure out how it works, and then figure out, okay, um, here's how it works. How can I make it do something it's not supposed to? And oftentimes things that are like stopped by like subscriptions or like you have to pay money for it don't necessarily get tested as often as like the free stuff.
Right.
So purchasing some of that stuff, you have to kind of invest in yourself a little bit to get some of those like premium subscriptions to some of these services to be able to actually access their stuff in the back end that other people aren't going to look at. And then you can sometimes get paid out a nice bounty and then you make your money back.
Yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, I definitely like at some point I finally bought like my own burp license so that I could do more with bug bounty, and ouch, right? That was not cheap.
I did
But
the same thing this year.
yeah, but it's an investment, right? It is an investment in yourself. Um, it's having your own like toolkit, right? And so yeah, I mean, you might have licensing that you buy for tooling. You might pay for some subscriptions to services that you're interested in taking a look at for hacking, bug bounty work. Um, and you may have some subscription, I guess, for like cloud services, so you can spin boxes up
Mhm.
and perform different operations. So yeah, there is some investment for bug bounty hunters on things like that, right? Licenses, toolkit. You need the tools to do the job, effectively, right? So that's a good point. And yeah, there are some programs too, I would say that, and maybe this is more the private programs, it probably is. But I know, like, say you do well for a while on a platform like HackerOne or BugCrowd, uh, you'll get invites to private programs. And when you
Exactly.
get into those private programs, they're more likely to give you access to something that's like behind a paywall of some kind, right? So they might give you provision accounts for you that normally are services you have to pay for, because they recognize like nobody's testing these because they are behind a paywall, and we need people to test them. So a lot of times, I think with the private programs, you can get some access to like premium subscription features and stuff like that. And I agree, that's a great place to look. Um, in my experience, I've seen a lot of times where a vulnerability is behind authentication, it's behind a premium subscription, it's behind an enterprise account, like where if consumers get one kind of account with certain features and an enterprise gets a different kind of account, it's like, okay, well, who's testing the enterprise stuff? Because bug
Right.
bounty hunters don't have enterprise accounts. So, um, yeah, anytime you can take a look at something like an enterprise account versus consumer account, I feel like there's always going to be stuff there, just because there's less eyes on it. So that's a really good point. Um, and you brought up a tool to me. There's also like writing tools and scripts, right? Um, and you brought up a tool to me that you helped with a few people for Burp, a plugin that I believe you ended up using on Bug Bounty, if I'm not mistaken. But it
Yeah.
is certainly good for that. So I'm going to bring that up too if you want to talk about. It's for Burp plugin called Collab Filtrator.
Yeah. So um Synac versus other bug bounty programs have different actual expectations for how they accept vulnerabilities. And a great example of this is remote code execution. So on other bug bounty programs I've seen on like HackerOne or stuff, they just want to see, can you make it sleep for a couple of seconds or do a DNS lookup and capture that NS lookup in like Burp collaborator client to prove the RCE. But Synac's like, no, we want to see the actual output of that or else it doesn't count. So
Mm.
of not being able to get paid up for these vulnerabilities because oftentimes I get code execution, but I wouldn't necessarily be able to see the output of the command. So it'd be blind RCE.
Yeah.
And originally I'd be able to just spawn a reverse TCP shell or HTTPS shell or something like that back to a cloud, VPS or C2 or something like that. And all would be good, except for then companies started to actually block egress out of their network and you wouldn't be able to get out a lot of these common ports. But one thing that always actually worked out was DNS. DNS is one of those things that it finds a way, whether it gets, out through their network or it goes out to some external DNS server and then back to you. Like, if you can
Yeah.
get out via DNS and you can get a DNS lookup, you can get the actual output actually sent via DNS. So I got the idea for DNS exfiltration. I was like, let's Google this and see what's out there so far for it. And there were a couple blog posts at the time, but there wasn't really a whole lot of like automated tooling for any of this. And I was like, well, I better build something then. And one of the co-authors, Jared McLaren, he actually had some experience prior building Burp plugins. So I went to him. I'm like, hey, can you help me with like the graphical interface and stuff like that? And he's like, sure. So he helped me with the templating and everything, and helped me troubleshoot a lot of the stuff. And I originally wrote this tool in Python because Burp's written in Java, and I'm a Python guy. So Python's pretty much just writing Java code using Python syntax. And I'm going to eventually convert this to Java because at some point Burp is going to get rid of all the plugins that aren't, Java only. But
Uh,
um, with this tool, I can send you the link to the GitHub here real quick and show you like a little preview.
okay.
But I think that's the correct link. Yeah, to the private chat.
Cool.
But with this tool, pretty much it would take your command execution that executes blindly, and then it will take the output base64 encode it or hex encode it, depending on the type of encoding. It then takes all the encoded data, chops it up in little chunks, and then it does DNS lookup 001 dot burp collaborator domain dot TLD 002 or whatever. So in this example here, I have the command dir c inetpub www root as like the command I wanted to execute. You click the execute button and it'll generate a PowerShell payload, which Frank Scarpella actually helped me write this part of it, which is really cool. And then you copy it to the clipboard, execute that, and then the output would come back after the command is executed in a little output box after all the DNS lookups come back, and then they're all decoded, or I'll reassemble back into the puzzle pieces, decoded, and then you know provide it out there. So there's a lot more stuff I'm working on for this. I'm going to try to add some SQL injection, um, DNS exfiltration capabilities to this, and another little tab on it. And I'm still working on it. It's just whenever I get the free time to do that. So
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, so I became familiar with DNS exfil. I mean, I was aware of it, but I didn't really mess with it too much. Uh, and then I had to do some testing in an environment that like nothing got out, right? And uh, I ended up finding a DNS cat, I think it's called DNS
sure.
cat 2. Believe that's make sure. Uh, yeah, DNS cat 2, and it's like a little uh sort of a C2. It's really just like a little reverse shell framework. Um, but it uses all DNS, right? And I it's very cool. Um, that very cool that you can even do that. Very difficult to prevent, very difficult to detect, etc. Also kind of fickle when you're trying to like run it as an interactive shell and
Yes.
run a whole bunch of PowerShell commands and stuff like this. Like you might lose some data in between. But I love this tool here. Um, I mean, this is great because that's like such a common problem. I feel like with blind command execution, blind SQL injection as well. But if you can turn SQL injection into RCE, could still use this. But yeah, I mean, I've run into this so many times trying to figure out a way to prove my command execution beyond somebody's depth, right? And I've definitely been in situations where I showed people, oh yeah, a sleep based payload or a DNS collaborator payload, and they didn't. It depends, sometimes too on the like knowledge level of the person that you're trying to convince. And so they're just like, nah, I'm not having it with, a sleep payload or something. And I have to find some way to get some better output. So this is awesome. So what you do here is you select your platform, uh, the command that you want to run, and then you actually copy this payload to the clipboard, right? And then this is the actual payload that you insert where you would put like your command
Yeah.
in the actual command injection or whatever your
Yep.
situation is, right? And then you get back your output, and that's via, I guess, this collaborator link, right? That's where it's sending these DNS responses.
And again, you can use
Very
a
cool.
collaborator server too. As soon as you configure private collaborator, then that changes each time it's generated. So it's
Right.
make it a very simple, robust tool. It doesn't have a lot of extra bells and whistles. It does the job it needs to do, and it's not overly complicated. Because I would see all these Burp plugins where they have all sorts of buttons and like switches and things like that, and be confused. I'm like, how do I use this versus this right here? I mean, you were able to just look at it and see like, okay, it's pretty easy to like walk yourself through
Yeah.
cool functionality of it. So the idea was to make something that didn't require a manual.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a really great tool. I definitely will end up using this myself.
Cool.
So that is really cool. And yeah, I will save. I'll put this link down in the description uh, as well if people want to check out this tool. You can also just go to the BAP. It's in the BAP store, I guess, right?
Yep, it is. So
All
every
right,
time,
cool. So you could probably find it right through the Burp GUI without having to deal with the source, even, right?
yeah, all the new updates initially go into my repository, and then I send them to Portswigger. Then they add to the App Store. So the latest and greatest features are going to be in my repo, and then you'll eventually
Ah,
see, like a week or so after they're released in the App Store.
okay, cool. Yeah. So if they want the absolute latest, they can go check the source code. Awesome. Yeah, that's a great tool. Like I said, I definitely, well, I've been in situations before where I would have used it, right? So I know I'll end up using it. Really cool. Yeah. So sometimes you got to write your own tooling too. Um, I think, in my experience, the best bug bounty hunters that I dealt with often would include like a Python script or something that they wrote with the report, right? So usually small stuff, but definitely if you're capable of scripting out something novel for a report, I think it certainly helps. So, but that's cool that this is like reusable too, right? It's you
Sure.
can use it across a lot of engagements. So that's awesome. So, another thing that you mentioned you're doing is like 1099 work. Uh, and that's I'm guessing this is like consulting style work,
Yeah.
like one-off testing or something. Um, how how do you find that different from your consulting work that you did, for a company? Like what are some of the uh, key differences, I guess, when you're kind of more freelance?
Sure. So oftentimes it really depends on how the company has their structure set up, right? Sometimes companies are more putting you in front of the client and just having you interact with them, versus others are like, nope, we're gonna like stop you right there, we're gonna handle all the client interaction, you just talk to us. And the report templates are going to be different between each thing. So for instance, like HackerOne does pen tests, and that's a very great example. They pretty much have a Slack channel set up for you to interact with the clients and give them updates and everything along the way. And then again, you submit the vulns through the platform, just like you would normally, but instead of getting paid out, you get paid out zero for those, and then you just get paid flat rate for the whole pen test. So oftentimes it's great for being able to supplement, times when bug bounty is not so great, where I'm hunting on a bunch of targets and not finding anything, and then I can do this and have at least some guaranteed income. And I managed to get a lot of these opportunities along the way just by networking. So like back in the day, I met Dr. Jared DeMott at a um, like a cybersecurity presentation, and I remembered from the SAN 660 course, Steve Sims kept mentioning a lot of his work, and I'm like, oh, I recognize that name. So I got to meet him, and then went out for beers afterwards with him, and then he ended up asking me, hey, do you want to work on some projects together? And I was like, sure. And he had started his own company called VDA Labs, and I did some 1099 work for him, doing that, and he ended up leaving there. He now works at Microsoft and actually works as part of their bug bounty program, triage.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But like just networking like that is a great way to identify a lot of these startup pen test companies who they need the talent, and I can provide that talent, and sometimes they even want you to design a report template for them, and so you can sort of like take the examples from all sorts of different organizations that you say, oh, I like the graph from here, I like the narrative style from here, I like the findings section from here, and you can kind of like create custom report templates, and then they have their logo slapped on it, and then it looks different but similar to other reports that you might see. So again, sometimes these things can involve anywhere from web app testing to network penetration testing to even hardware device testing, and still NAPTAP testing as well.
Awesome. And again, you said networking. Some of the people we talked about earlier from conferences and stuff. Um, again, just want to focus on how important that is, and for the industry, I think. And with that said, you're going to DEF CON this year, I believe, right?
Um, there's a good chance that I'll be going to DEF CON. I'd be doing the car hacking village. I haven't
Yeah.
actually gotten a ticket yet, and there's been a lot of stuff going on in my life. We're actually looking at getting a house right now, so we're in that whole process.
Ah,
A lot of big life changes and everything. So I'm pretty sure, oftentimes I can find like, hey, if you go to like DEF CON or Black Hat and you like speak at our booth, we'll pay you X amount of dollars. And I'm like, cool, that'll help pay for my conference expenses and I'll, be able to do that. So
seeking sponsorship. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah, yeah, and when is GurCon actually? I was Is it in like September?
Upon ranges, each year, I know this year it's going to be September 26th and 27th at DeVos Place in downtown Grand Rapids.
Okay.
They have like all the details at gurcon.com. But oftentimes you've got like certain conferences. I know DEF CON's always a summer conference. GurCon's always a
Yeah,
fall conference. I think it's
right.
always like a winter conference. So it's nice to have.
Yeah, late winter, I feel like for CypherCon. Yeah, and then they also have SecretCon now, which is an associated conference, which is in like June, I want to say. Um, hmm. Yeah, I might have to get up there for GurCon. I've been meaning to go for like 5 years. But I always, it's one of those things. I always have something going on, or there's a conference really close to it, or something like that. But I'm gonna have to come check it out because I am a Michigan native originally. I grew up in Michigan, so I need to get up there and check that out. But yeah, the conferences are are hugely important, I think, and so I just keep trying to encourage everybody to get out there, but really encourage companies to sponsor and get people out there, especially with how much like travel costs nowadays. But yeah, it's important. I'm gonna try to get around to some more. Maybe I'll put GurCon on my calendar. I'll have to see. I don't know if their CFP is open. I'll have to take a look. But I encourage people if there's if submit to CFPs.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think that's also like a huge way to network with people. People get to see your work and then generally want to talk to you about it after. So definitely submit to CFPs. I'll have to see if there's one open for GurCon. But that's awesome. So it sounds like you've got a lot of positive things going on. You said you're in the housing market, and I suspect you're enjoying some of the freedom of being more freelance, bug bounty, 1099.
Oh yeah. It's. I mean, my fiance told me that I had 9 months to prove that I could actually make a living off of this, and so far I've been doing a great job with it. She actually, in between her getting a full time pen testing job and leaving her last sysadmin job, she actually did bug bounty for about a year, and she was able to actually do that on her own. And she kind of helped give me the confidence that hey, maybe I could potentially do this because again, doing a full time job plus bug bounty on the side is great, but a lot of times because the full time job takes precedent, you don't have as much time and free time to bug hunt. So just going, out YOLO style with it, just saying, all right, I'm gonna, take all this time and commit it to bug bounty and 1099 stuff. I found that you do have to manage money a little bit better because you can't expect to have a recurring paycheck always. Sometimes you have to, plan ahead, and you might have a great month, and then the next month is totally garbage. So like, um, I'm lucky that my fiance, has a pen testing job and helps guarantee the income as well, and then I can help supplement that. So
Yeah, I love how she challenged you. You, you got 9 months to prove you could pull this off. That's awesome. That's really cool. And I'm always interested when I meet like hacker couples. That's really cool. So I know uh you mentioned when we were talking before that she's a hacker. She's done bug bounty, and I'm excited to get her on and talk to her about her experiences as well. But I just love the idea that she challenged you as a hacker. I mean, I'm sure that that has definitely given you some extra motivation,
Oh, sure.
where sometimes you'd be like, "Oh, I'm gonna go do whatever for a little while," but you're like, "Nah, I better, I better dig into some bug bounty first, right?" So probably just motivate you to put in some of that extra time. That's really cool.
Yeah, and the great thing about that is she can always sometimes, help me out when I'm stuck on something. She's like, "Oh, have you tried this?
Yeah.
I didn't think about that." So, um, it's nice when you have someone who actually understands exactly what you do and can help, provide input.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Adam, it has been so great catching up with you. And I'll have to, like I said, catch you at a conference or something, because it's always great talking to you. And I thank you so much for coming and sharing your experience with everybody. I mean, one of the main points of the show is to, uh, provide information to people who are interested in hacking and people who are coming up and maybe don't know how to get their first job doing penetration testing or red team, or they just don't know how to get into the niche that maybe they're interested in. So I really appreciate that you come and share your experience. And one more thing I want to remember is to send people to your blog, if you don't mind. So I'm going to share that real quick, and I will put that also in the uh, description. So let me get this shared real quick and let everybody know where they can go to find out more and follow your work. So again, URL is not showing up. I'm going to drop the link in the description, but it's adamlogue.com, obviously. And um,
Yeah, this
before you go, is there anything on here that you wanted to talk about real quick? I know it's some of your older work, but is there anything that you wanted to highlight that people maybe would get a kick out of reading?
Sure. I mean, again, I don't post a whole lot of stuff in this blog because oftentimes the bug bounty programs I'm, working on are private and I can't disclose that kind of.
Yeah, NDA and yeah.
But before I actually got into bug bounty, this was sort of the way I'd do that sort of gray area thing of security research with responsible disclosure. So
Yeah,
this was
yeah.
sort of me just connecting like an iPhone app or something to Burp Suite and trying to see if I could find vulnerabilities. So there's some cute little things like some of the iDoors that I'd be able to find. I was able to find some vulnerabilities in TGI Fridays, a reward program, and same thing with Panera Bread. Um, again, these things were all fixed before I actually posted them. And then, of course, every time I come up with some
Right.
novel idea or like tool, then I'll actually post that. So like in 2016, I did some research into actually creating PNG images that natively have cross-site scripting payloads in them, and that way, if you uploaded an image and it asks you to resize it, or that's one of the reasons why you see that now is because of a lot of this research. Um, it used to be upload an image and that image would be stripped of metadata, but then any part of the image that wouldn't actually be stripped would stay in there. And you couldn't just hide your payloads in the metadata anymore. You have to bake an image together that actually contained that cross-site scripting payload or
Ah,
that like reverse shell, not reverse shell, sorry, that web shell payload. And you'd pretty much upload that. And if you could find a way to get that image to render as HTML instead of as image, slash PNG, you'd be able to
sure.
get that to execute. So lots of
Ah,
cool little tidbits and stuff. But
yeah, that's a really cool story. Yeah, I definitely would recommend people reading that. Yeah, because even though these things may be patched or fixed, right? Like like how the technique and how you kind of thought about it, I think is super helpful.
yeah,
Awesome. Oh
most
yeah, you got mobile app on here.
yeah, a lot of
Very
the
cool.
iDoors where I'd pretty much find like the customer ID number, flip it with another customer ID number. A great example is like for TGI Fridays, right? Ryan Griffin and I were, um, we decided to go out there together. We would both order like dinner. We'd put it all on my bill and then use my rewards card to, or sorry, we put it all on his bill and use his rewards to actually get the points for it. And we try to use my account to steal his points. And that way we're doing it in sort of an ethical manner, right? Again, that was back
Yeah.
before bug bounty programs were a thing. So we were trying to reach out via email to like security@companyname.com or via LinkedIn. And sometimes it would be, several months and months of trying to reach out to these companies to disclose this stuff. And some of them would be like, well, what are your intentions? Like, no,
Are you trying to ransom us?
yeah, no, this isn't like a, holding anything for ransom. We're not blackmailing you or extorting you. We just want to disclose this to let you know, hey, you need to fix this. And
Yeah.
after they realized that we had good intentions and didn't want to send us to jail, they'd work with us and we'd help them get that sorted. So these days, with all the bug bounty programs out there, it's so much safer to do that. You have all these like
Yeah.
harbor like rules and everything that's written in there, and it's way better to just jump on HackerOne or BugCrowd or apply it to Synact to be able to do this stuff in a safe environment.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I did some similar stuff with responsible disclosure hunting on my own years ago, but now it's like everybody has a program just about. And then you get that safe haven. So totally agree. Um, and yeah, that's I still like the idea of you like email and they're like, "What are you trying to do?"
Yeah.
Back then, especially, I could imagine they're like, "Are we getting started?" Uh, that's awesome. Well, thank you again so much for coming, Adam, and sharing your experience. I really appreciate it. It's been absolutely great.
Awesome.
Cheers.
Cheers.
To an end, to an end, to an end.